Well, welcome back, and it's a new day. And unfortunately, I'm living in the middle of construction, so you might hear just a little bit of work being done outside as they clean up after Hurricane Milton. Yes, it's been a few weeks, and they're still cleaning up. But we ended up part two of how to 10x your Social Security with the idea of using the income to convert to capital. So if you haven't watched part two in a little while, let's cover that real quick. I gave the example of retiring at age 62, taking your Social Security early, and we made the presumption that at age 70, the maximum period of time until your money can accumulate, you'd be at $4,000 a month. However, if you watch this and let's say you're in 2024, let's say that you take your income at age 62. So we're going to make a presumption that you're going to get $2,000 a month. And I talked about how you take that $2,000 a month, you borrow in your house. That would give you $350,000 down. I went to the second part of that example of you now get $350,000 tax-free, presuming that the basis on your house, meaning what you paid for the house plus improvements, is at least $350,000. Now, if you do that, there's two benefits. One is you get the money out tax-free. Two is any of the interest that you pay on that loan, and we used a gross interest rate of 5%, 30% tax bracket. So we made the presumption that the net cost of money to you would be about 3.5% rate of interest to the bank. However, you're going to get $350,000 completely tax-free. We use the example that you're going to find a piece of rental property, hopefully multi-door, as I talked about before, so that you don't run into issues of management, and enough doors, meaning rental units, that it makes sense to hire a property manager. Now, we took this to the second part, which is, okay, now if I have that $3.5 million piece of property, I'm putting $350,000 down. So I have a, call it $3.15 million mortgage, and I'm going to use the rental income to make that mortgage payment. And we're making the presumption that upon this purchase of this $3.5 million property, that you have enough cash flow to actually hire a property manager. So this way it's off your back. So in part two, I made the presumption that there's no cash flow. There's no positive cash flow. But in comparison to what you might do with delaying Social Security between the ages of 62 and 70, if you delay it, you're not getting any income either. I used the one example of spending that money and upping your lifestyle, which is certainly one option to enjoy your life. But I also used the idea of 10xing it. And here's how we do that. So we're going to take that $350,000, we're going to put it into the rental property, buy a $3.5 million property. You might say, well, again, I'm not going to get a mortgage for $3.5 million. You will if the rental income supports the mortgage payment. Again, when you're buying multi-door properties, it's not as much about the total income you have as much as it is the rental properties and the sustainability security of that rent. It could be history in that area. It could be the proposed comparables that you're proving to the bank, but it can be done. Without a doubt, I'm living proof. I've done this over and over and over again to the point where I bought over 70 properties, and only a few of those were without debt. Most of those were with debt. 98% of those were with debt, and I certainly didn't have the income to support that many mortgages, but the rental income is what supports the credit to get that mortgage. Okay, so now let's just do these numbers real quick. I'm going to go really slow. I'll repeat them. So we're going to take the $2,000 a month that you get at age 62. You're going to go borrow $350,000 on your house, and we're making the presumption it's not going to be a taxable event because your basis is at least $350,000, and you can write off the mortgage payment. The mortgage payment on your home mortgage is the same as the monthly income from Social Security, which is at this point pretty much guaranteed. Now, again, you could take the $350,000 out, as I talked about in part 2. You can buy a boat, you can buy an RV, you can buy an airplane, you can buy a vacation house. I'm talking about making more money with this. Now, in the first example, you deferred Social Security from $2,000 a month to a hopeful $4,000 a month at age 70. So you have a $2,000 per month bump at 70. But you go from 62 to 70 with no income. Let's also remind us of the fact that if you defer and you die anytime in between then, or the worst, age 70 in one day, because you've waited all those years, there's no death benefit that passes on to your family. That's important because that's a present value of assets that you're giving up. So now we're going to take this $350,000 that we borrowed on the house. We're going to go down there and we're going to buy a rental property. $3.5 million with a $3.15 million mortgage, right? Okay, now we're doing an 8-year comparison. So here's what we're going to do. If I take a $3.5 million house and I go out 8 years at a less than historical average of growth on real estate, which is right now about 6.1%, let's say I use 5%. And again, we're going to presume no cash flow. We're going to presume that all goes back into the mortgage, repairs, utilities, and property manager. So there's zero out of net income coming into you for those 8 years. Okay, here we go. That $3.5 million property in 8 years is going to be worth about $5.2 million. Now, here's the cool thing. If I look at an amortization schedule, we borrowed $3.15 million. In 8 years, we owe $3 million on it. So, let's say for all practical purposes, we turn around and we sell that property, excluding taxes, because there are ways through 1031 exchanges. And let's say you don't want to be in the property business anymore. There's what's called Delaware statutory trusts. And there's also what's called a 664 trust. So if someone tells you that there is no way to sell a piece of property and avoid taxes other than a 1031 exchange, they are absolutely incorrect. So let's use this number again. Again, because I'm doing this all verbally, I don't have presentation slides, so I'm going to go through it again slowly. We take Social Security at age 62. That's $2,000 a month. We go borrow $350,000 on our house. Take the $350,000 and we move it over into a $3.5 million rental property, multi-door rental property. We're going to presume zero cash flow for the first 8 years. In the 8th year, that $3.5 million property, growing at 5% interest per year, will equal $5.2 million. Excuse me, we sell the property. Let's assume we use a 664 trust or some other methodology. We're going to net about $2.2 million after all said and done. Now remember, if I would have just taken my Social Security at age 62 and I computed the current proposed, because again, bankruptcy at 2035, if I proposed a 8% increase on my Social Security, at age 70, I end up with what? $250,000, we said? $200,000 in raw money coming in from Social Security, but assuming that's invested, that's $250,000. By leveraging that, we can 10x it. Why? Now, I've got $2.1 to $2.2 million in capital in my pocket. Now, I did say 10x, right? Okay, so where does the 10x come into play? All right, so let's take a look. If I buy a rental property, I am entitled to a depreciation deduction. Now, we already said there's no positive cash flow, meaning once you collect the rents, pay your property manager, pay your mortgage, pay your property tax, pay whatever non-segregated utilities are there, you have zero cash flow. But that does not mean you do not get a tax benefit. Here's the tax benefit. I have to take the value of the property, call it $3.5 million, and I have to subtract the cost of the land. Now, how do you know that? Unless you're physically buying the land and then you're improving it, we're going to use, say, a 10% value on the property. And I'm going to round this off just so it makes sense. So again, we buy a $3.5 million property, 10% of that, $350,000. Now, I know that would be $3.15 million, but let's just round it for the sake of argument. We're going to just say it's $3 million in building, like the physical structure, and just for the heck of it, call it $500,000 in land cost. Why is that important? Well, because I can take that building cost and I can depreciate it. Now, depending upon the type of property, either commercial or residential, it depends upon the depreciation. So I'm going to use kind of an average. The 40 years on commercial versus 28, I'm rounding here, on residential. I'm just going to call it 0.3% or 3% per year. What do I mean by that? So now I got a $3 million property that I can depreciate, call it 3% depreciation per year. That's $90,000 a year in a tax deduction that I can get. Now, can I use anything else to offset that? Absolutely. Now, depending upon how you run the property, if this is your sole retirement type of income, if we can use some of the IRS rules to claim you as a full-time real estate investor, we can write off that entire $90,000. Why is that important? Oh my gosh, well, let's take it. Over an 8-year period of time, we are going to be able to deduct somewhere around $700,000. In a 30% tax bracket, that $700,000 is going to convert to about $200,000 in tax savings. Now, I'm going to expand on that in just a second, but I told you that if we did that math, and I'm promising the 10x effect here, if I did that math, I borrowed $350,000, I put it on a rental property, I owe 3.15. After 8 years, same comparison, same benchmark as deferring Social Security. And now what I do is I put that down on the rental property, the $3.5 million property at a 5% rate of return equals $5.2 million after 8 years. I say, okay, I'm out. I sell it. I use a certain type of technique, either a DST or a 664. If I do a 1031, I'm just into another rental property. I can never really cash it out. Okay? So now what I do is I sell it, I bank that $2 million. Now, if I bank that $2 million, I'm still not 10x, because if you remember, by deferring the money, the Social Security, at, call it age 62, we figured out it would be $250,000. To 10x that, I've got $2.1 to $2.2 million in profit, but I've got almost $250,000 in physical tax savings. This is the beauty of it. I could literally walk away in 8 years with $2.5 million. Now, there's what's called an exit, no exit strategy. And it means that we don't necessarily sell the property. And here's how we do it. Because most people think, you get to a piece of property and you figure out an exit strategy period of time. And because I don't want to become a landlord anymore. Listen, I made that fundamental mistake. I had 70 properties. Had I kept those properties from the mid-'80s, they'd be worth over $20 million today in total. I sold them. That was a fundamental mistake that I made. And the reason that I sold them is I got sick and tired of being a landlord. For me, it was a nightmare, but it wasn't because it's about being a landlord. It's because I didn't know what I was doing in the property management oversight. I hired people. I dealt with all the problems. I dealt with all that kind of stuff. I hired people individually. Had I hired a good management company, I could have just let those properties sit there. I would have earned less money because I'm paying the property management company, but those properties would be worth so much money today. And the exit, no exit strategy is as the property grows, we simply refinance. We pull equity out, and as the rents increase, because I made a very bad assumption here. I made the assumption that today you have no cash flow from that property. That's making the assumption that rents never go up. But over 8 years, rents are going to go up. It's a foregone conclusion. If rents go up, and I take out, say, in 8 years, I could take out $1.5 million in additional equity. I take the original $3 million that I owe, I refinance that property for $4.5 million because I'm sitting on a $5.3 million property, or $5.25, and I use the increase in rents to pay for that excess mortgage, right? So now I've done an exit, no exit strategy. I've pulled that equity out. What I'm getting at is I've done all of this by converting the income from Social Security into capital and then into leverage. And that's the way that you 10x your Social Security. Now, before I leave, I want to throw one other little tidbit in here for you. Yeah, maybe two. Number one, you don't have to convert capital from a Social Security conversion into rental properties. It could be other things. So let me give you another example. Let's say that I looked and said I can borrow money at 5%. My net cost after income tax is 3.5%. If I know that my Social Security is going to cover that mortgage payment because it's fixed income coming in, it's fixed income going with a mortgage. And by the way, you don't ever want to use a variable rate mortgage. That's just a recipe for disaster because you have no idea what it might get to in 8 years. So fixed income coming in from Social Security, fixed rate on that mortgage. Well, one thing I didn't even cover is Social Security will go up, but the mortgage payment will stay the same. And over a period of time, you're actually going to see an income gap where your Social Security is actually more than what the mortgage payment is, and you do have a net cash flow. But let's say that you don't want to do a rental property. And let's say you like equities, anything in the markets, you like those kinds of things. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take the $350,000 out. And if you figured out that the net rate of return is 3.5%, or not net rate of return, net cost of money is 3.5%, but you could invest long-term in the markets for 8, 9, 10, 11%. The S&P 500 has 50, 60 years of an average rate of return of over 11%. Again, here's my little disclosure. Past history is not indicative of future results. You cannot bank on that. You cannot guarantee that. Well, you can't do that in anything, right? You can't even do that with Social Security. You can't do it with real estate. There is nothing in the world that is 100% guaranteed. So you just have to pick where your risk battles are. But if I just took that $350,000 out and I was paying net 3.5% in interest, but I used non-dividend paying stocks that grow without tax, let's say it's 11%. Well, in 8 years, my $350,000 that I borrowed on my house is going to be worth over $700,000. But now I owe a little bit less on that $350,000, right? So the benefit of this is that I don't have to do rental properties. Rental properties are going to offer the most breadth in returns and in tax deductions. Equities aren't going to give you a tax deduction, but it's an alternative. I can't help myself. I'm going to throw one other one out there. What if what we did was we used Social Security to do a Roth conversion? And I should do a whole nother video on this because it does benefit a lot of people. We already know the problems with IRAs. Secure Act 2.0 is going to force money out in under 10 years to beneficiaries. It's an absolute tax bomb waiting to go off. And so how do you fix that? Roth conversions. Why don't most people? Well, first off, the financial advisory community, they don't want you doing Roth conversions. Why? Well, you do a Roth conversion, you got to pay tax. They have less money to manage, less money to charge you on. If you do a Roth conversion, or you go to a CPA, and 99% of these CPAs don't even understand the Roth rules, and their initial response is, oh, you don't want to do a Roth conversion, you'll have to pay taxes now, let it defer forever. That is not the wisest thing in the world to do. But here's what I could do. Let's say that what I did was I borrowed $350,000. And then what I did was I went into my IRA and I said, I want to convert this to a Roth. So I convert it to a Roth. Let's say I convert the equivalable amount of, let's say, $1 million. Let's say I have $1 million in IRA. I'm going to owe $350,000 in income tax. Where do I get that kind of income tax? Because I don't want to take it out of the IRA in the Roth conversion, because then I get less punch out of the Roth conversion. But if I borrow that money, $350,000, I can use that to pay the tax. Now I have $1 million sitting inside of an IRA, 100% tax-free, completely tax-free. And you know that old 5-year rule that some people go, well, you don't want to do that because you got to lock it up for 5 years. That's not accurate. You only have to you have to keep the principal in for 5 years. So what we do with every single client, we open up Roths right now. What that does is that starts the 5-year clock ticking. It's not 5 years on every conversion. It's 5 years of ownership of the Roth. So if your financial advisor or CPA has not said, just open up a Roth, throw $100 in it, make sure there's money in it, and that starts the clock ticking, your financial advisor and CPA is not thinking outside the box. They're thinking inside the lines, and that doesn't help anybody, especially you. So before I conclude, there are ways to leverage and 10x your Social Security and use it in so many different areas. But again, it really comes down to somebody that can do the calculations, somebody that can show you the different options, the upsides, the downsides. So when you're doing this, make sure you're not using these online calculators. Make sure that you're dealing with a planner that's not working for a big company, because they're not going to be incentivized to tell you how to do a Roth conversion or early Social Security. Make sure you're not dealing with these people selling annuities, trying to fill some whole gap so that they can sell an annuity. And make sure you're not asking CPAs that have no idea how to do these mathematical calculations. Hey, with that in mind, I'm going to sign off. And hopefully you've learned something from this. And please, in order to support this channel, would love you to subscribe, because I'm going to be producing a lot more interesting content. If you don't subscribe and put notifications on there, you won't know when this new content comes out. With that in mind, have a great day.